I just want to introduce the panelists real quick, and then we'll get right into it. Okay, no. So first we have Yvonne Guillen, a student recruiter and community engagement associate at Public Prep. Yvonne is a student, where she focuses on giving parents a voice around school choice and works closely with local community organizations and stakeholders for the betterment of the broader community. She works to inform families in the Bronx about the options available to them for their children's education. Oh, sorry, let me just put this up here so you can see. All right, next we have Courtney Marshall, English teacher and Associate Dean of Advising at Phillips Exeter Academy. She's an English teacher. All right, I said that. She supports the school's advising program and family engagement activities. And she's also a dorm head of one of the all-gender dorms and serves on a number of committees devoted to anti-racism, diversity, and equity in education. And we have Kimberly Cummins. She is a lead teacher from Brooklyn, New York. She was promoted to a lead teacher position, which allows her to continue to teach, but also train and coach teachers, as well as other responsibilities. Kimberly has recently begun the process of obtaining her school leadership license and is committed to her continued growth and the support and development of all students and their families. Okay, and we had one more speaker. I'll introduce him if he comes later. Okay, so now let's get into it. So the first question, I just wanted to be a lightning round where you answer in 1 or 2 sentences. So the first question is, what is one thing that is driving you crazy about education right now? What? Yeah.
I guess I can begin. I think the thing that's driving me the most crazy is the uncertainty, right? I think not knowing what's going to happen, where we are going, and just trying to be as supportive as I can to not just the students and their families, but to other teachers, right? So in my position, I do support other teachers and coach and train other teachers. And I think that is the craziest part for me because I'm trying to figure it out and help them figure it out. And so I think that right now is the craziest thing.
I think for me, it's attending to students' social and emotional mental health needs in a spirit of collaboration and partnership, but doing it in a culture that values competition. So that's really tough to balance.
Competition. Okay, thank you. And Yvonne, did you want to answer?
I mean, I echo what both of the ladies said. You guys are pretty much on point. I do agree with this state that we're in right now, just trying to figure out everything, educating our kids and also watching out for their social emotional being, I think is something that is very important, very crucial, and yeah, something that is at the top.
Yes, thank you. Yes, these are all great points. Yes, social emotional is so important. And yes, that, you know, when you think of like Eurocentric ideals and Afrocentric and with how those two can clash sometimes, when we're more collaborative and others may be more competitive. So the next question is, with the next lightning round, so 1 or 2 sentences again, what is one thing you adore about education?
This year I'm teaching 10th grade and we just finished Frankenstein, and I've read Frankenstein so many times. I've taught it so many times. And the thing I love about teaching is I get to have a new experience every single time with a brand new group of kids. And that's what I love the most. I just love my students.
Okay, great. Great.
I think I'll go next. I think one thing I would say that I love about education is being able to impact the student's life, right? Impacting the future of tomorrow, I think for me is something that I love about education.
I think the thing that I adore most, especially in high school, is the ability to create my own curriculum, and I can work with students to teach them and talk with them and grow with them through things that they want to learn. Because I'm a history teacher, so I really adore that ability.
Okay, I'm just see if there's any questions in the chat. Okay, don't forget to put questions in the chat. And while you're doing that, Charles is going to sign on. But I do like what all three of you said, Kimberly, Courtney, and Yvonne. Yes, the love for students. I'll get to you, Charles. The love for students, the impact you can make, and definitely creative control. I'm always telling my family I want to go somewhere where I have more creative control. So with all that being said, let's just introduce Charles. Charles, we're so glad to have you. You know, this is what we do all this for as teachers. We do it for the youth. So let me just introduce you. So Charles is a senior in high school. He aspires to be a doctor and work in public health. Beyond his career, his ultimate goal is to improve the health and welfare of marginalized communities through medicine and other pursuits, such as financial and educational resources. Welcome, Charles. Okay, so Charles, we were just talking about like some things that we adore and or find a little frustrating with education. I don't know if you wanted to say anything to that. Like, what's one thing you adore about it, like being in school?
Say for me, it's very personal. I think the reason I'm so passionate about education is my educators, because my first teacher, my preschool teacher, was my grandma. So of course that was special. And then my elementary school principal was a Black woman. So I grew up, you know, in the rare space that I'm a Black child with Black educators. And I think that was so big for me, you know, not only my personal development and confidence, but, you know, to have somebody there that cares about me, you know, because of course my grandma was, but my principal, that's like my aunt. You know, she spoke with my mom about every day. So I knew I didn't have any, you know, room to play around. So just that and the relationships that you can build with students as an educator. And I think that's really what has fostered my development as a student.
Yeah, so as you can see, relationships are so important. Yeah, I can't say that enough. But yeah, so thank you for that, Charles. So this question is what has been the toughest or most difficult challenge you've experienced or observed, and how would you advise on navigating it? So it's kind of like a twofold question. Yeah, anything, especially during COVID, you know, what is a challenge that you've come across, and how would you think, how would you go about it, or how have you gone about it, or how do you think the school system should go about it?
I can go, and I think comes out of what Charles just said. So I'm up here. I live in New Hampshire, and I'm at a boarding school. I'm at Phillips, Exeter, which is an old school. It's a very it's a rigorous school. It's a tough school to get into. It's really demanding. And one thing I saw over the pandemic was kind of a disproportionate increase among Black and Latinx students on the list of students who are on academic probation, warning, you know, kind of kids having trouble. And I think for a long time, we at independent schools thought that that wasn't an issue, right? That everybody who comes here is going to be excellent and we didn't have to do anything special or to even consider like what you said, Charles, about what maybe the impact is of having Black educators. And I say that as the only Black woman in my department. We are always losing Black faculty. Like there are like 2 Black women left after this year in our school. So it's an issue. So one of the things that I did is I signed up to be a volunteer academic coach. And I wanted to see what it would be like to work with Black students. This is a residential school, so most kids move here and they come from all over the world. And I actually took the time to try something that worked for me, which is engaging with families. Having, I bought a kid lunch yesterday and I said, just come by, have lunch. I just want to hear how things are going. Turns out she needed tissue. So I went to the drugstore and got her some Puffs Plus. So these kind of things about showing them that I cared for them. And she said something like she was ashamed, like she was ducking and dodging me. And I said, you never have to be embarrassed when it comes to me. I never want y'all to run from me, right? And I think just having that conversation with her and taking that different tact, that different path with thinking about how can I work together with somebody's parents or with their aunties to really help them succeed and let them know that they are loved, right? And I think putting that at the forefront is one way I've faced that challenge. And I find that when I think about love and relationship building and just affirming and pouring just joy and happiness into my students, then it makes every other decision that I do at my job, it makes it super easy. When I center Black kids, everything else falls into place. So Charles, what you said just really stuck with me because I had the same experience with teachers.
Okay, yes, it's so important. Yes, it takes a village. It takes a village. Yeah, you have to work with parents. I love I did lunch buddies a lot. So I definitely get, just sitting down. It's nothing like, talking over food. So anybody else wanna answer that question?
Yeah, I think along what Courtney was saying and Charles, the pandemic was difficult for all of us, right? It still is difficult for all of us. And I think when teachers were thrusted into this new role of teaching virtually or, hybrid or whatever role you are working in, we struggled a lot with connecting with students, right? How do you connect with them on a whole? How do you connect with their education? How do you connect with their social emotional well-being? How do you connect with their families, right? A lot of families losing jobs, losing loved ones, right? What is the priority? Is the priority making sure that you memorize, these presidents, or is the priority making sure that you ate this morning? Is the priority that, your family lost a loved one? Are we there to support your family? Right. And that was very difficult for a lot of us because while we want to take care of their whole, right, the well-rounded student, we're also up against what the state or the district is requiring us to also do. And they bump heads, right? Those two things. And in my role, it's been very difficult for me because I want teachers to be able to trust me in supporting them with that, right? Yes, I know that this math assignment matters. And yes, I know that this English assignment matters, but this kid has never turned their screen on, or this kid has never responded to you. Let's try a different approach, right? It's not that they're lazy. It's not that they don't want to do it. They're clearly showing up because they want to be here and they want to do this. And so how do you start with the relationship building and the heart and the mind of the child and their families and their physical needs before they even, get to the academics? Because I'm a firm, students are going to remember not what you said, but how you made them feel. And, in the school that I'm in, right, it's an alternative school. some students don't graduate, right? And I've had students reach out to me later down the line who have said, you know, Miss, I know I didn't graduate. I know I let you down, but you told me this and you reminded me of that. Like all these years later, like those things stuck with them more than anything I ever taught them out of a textbook or anything like that. So I think that is very difficult when you have the pandemic, but then you have what the state is requiring your school to do. How do I still do both when I know the priority is their social emotional well-being?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was telling my sister, before, she's not in education, but I was telling her about Maslow before blooms, right? You have to get those basic needs met first, like shelter. You have to feel safe, feel comfortable, confident. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, I struggle with that all the time. Yeah, just picking which one to do. But a lot of times now I'm new. They give me my own classroom, so I'm able to like 2 weeks ago. So I'm able to kind of like do a little bit more SEL, and and then get into the academics. But yeah. So anybody else want to add to that? Any challenges, or anything you would like to see changed in education? Or I know education is a really broad field. I have in the polls, and one of the poll questions is about I was trying to make a poll question, and it's like I'm looking at student schools to prison pipeline, social emotional LGBTQI issues. There's so much going on in the field right now, and but it's exciting. I'm excited because this is really an opportunity to change education, give students, try to make it more equitable and for all students.
If I could speak, I would just say really the two biggest things for me is number one, like it's been a problem, but because of the pandemic, now it affects everybody. Now it's seen as a problem, but access and like connectivity to, not only to the internet, but to the material, like you, like you said, to the stuff that you're studying, in your family life, with your teachers. It's such a big problem, especially for like minority children and Black children specifically, because, a lot of us have not had the resources for a long time, or have not seen ourselves in curriculum ever, besides, the one chapter of US history when they talk about slavery, and the first time I heard about something other than slavery was last year when we talked about the Harlem Renaissance for one period, and so I feel like that's such a big problem that it never gets discussed because, a lot of times we aren't at the table. And I think that's such a big issue. And connectivity, because if you don't feel connected, then you can't really do much. And it's just so hard to say interesting when none of this relates to you and you can't see yourself in what you're studying. And I just feel like that's one of the biggest problems.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, culturally relevant education, and I try to use text all the time. But this is not about me. It's all about you and the audience. So let's. But I wanted to add on to what you said, Charles, that about yes, connectivity, and also once they have the connection, knowing how to navigate the different websites. But also with the culturally relevant education, and talk about the Harlem Renaissance. I just want to know, did anybody, I'm not able to follow the news. I wasn't following the news that closely, but I know like there was a state, was it Ohio or whatever, that they tried to do they didn't want the anti-racism curriculum in their state or something. I don't know. Does anybody have thoughts on that? I just thought I'd bring it up.
Critical race theory. Yeah, they didn't want that. It literally, people like to create problems and then dodge solutions because, they think, oh, like I might be too young to deal with this when everybody else's kids were born having to deal with it and have to deal with it every day. And I just feel like it's so crazy. And the way that people are so easy to control, just give them a few good scare tactics and no, this will ruin my kid's life. If they learn about this at such a young age, they'll never be the same. And I really just feel like it teaches, people about what's going on. But of course, people don't want their children to know what's going on, because then they'd have to deal with their own prejudices and their own failures, and that's not something anybody really wants to deal with. So.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes. Definitely. That you know, that was on point, Charles.
And also, like, critical race theory is an actual field of study. And when these people talk about, they don't know what it is. Like, they don't know the major thinkers of it. They don't know the history of it. And so I refuse to have discussions with people who don't know what the term means, but they toss around. I think because the word critical and race and theory, they put them. So I think those words separately makes it sound like indoctrination and an agenda, and you put race, of course, you know, they're scared of that. But when you put those three words together, it's actually a field that they don't know anything about.
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's a new book came out by Dr. Goldie Muhammad called Cultivating Genius. And I was telling my co-teacher about it, and he's just like, but how does that help the children? And I was like, I'm glad you asked. Because then I just started talking about, you know, because in the book, Dr. Muhammad, she talks about how back in history, you know, people, they created, you know, learning circles, reading circles. They read to each other. They used, you know, they use that to gain skills and to know, they gain confidence through that as well as information. So, you know, and I was telling him that, you know, it says, like, if a child comes to you and says he doesn't like to read, especially a Black child, you can say, no, how can your ancestors died for your right to learn how to read. So you can't tell me you don't like to read, okay? So it's just things like that, like, really. So that's just fine. But yeah, it just goes to Courtney's point that you know, sometimes, like, people don't understand the importance of it. But you know, I'm glad we have things like this, conferences and panels like this to spread the word. So spread, talk, have these conversations, right? Okay, all right. I can so I have a question for the teachers, or it's just what is something you didn't know before you started teaching, or, you know, you didn't know recently that you now know that would have helped you or others, either before you started or before they started, or even now, what is something that you didn't know before that would help people now?
I think the biggest thing for me is that I don't know everything. Teaching is very humbling. You know, my first year teaching was a very humbling experience for me, right? Go through your master's degree and you learn all these skills in these classes, and you read all of this coursework, and then you get to the classroom and it's like, but that's not what I learned, right? And so being able to be flexible and adopt and change time and time again, right? Even when I thought my craft was developed, I had to change it again. And then the pandemic hit and I had to change it again, right? Like, we don't know everything. And the more we are honest with students about that and are vulnerable with students and say, look, we're doing this together. We're figuring this out together. I'm going to support you. I'm going to shield you. I'm going to be there for you in this process. I think it's something that when I talk to other teachers is like, I know that you know this math very well, or I know that you know this history very well, right? And that's great. But there are these other things that come with teaching that are experience, and let's try it out. And it's going to be ugly. It's going to be dirty, but we will figure it out. And the students, I find, are very grateful for that vulnerability, because then they see you as a human, right? They don't see you as this person so far above them. It is the same, almost at the same level, where they feel like they can come to you and can trust you with questions that they have. And Charles was saying something earlier about, like, students not seeing themselves in the curriculum. Like, that resonates with me so much because I'm a history teacher, right? I'm always thinking about, how are these things happening all the time and I'm not addressing it, and I'm not talking to them about it, like that would make me a poor educator. And so being open to learning and being open to continue to learn is something that I wish I knew day one that I didn't know. And it humbled me and has helped me to continue to grow as an educator.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely humbling. Stay humble. Yeah, you have to be vulnerable and be authentic with the students. And with your and then as a lead teacher when you're coaching other teachers, you have to you have to be vulnerable with the teachers as well. Anybody else want to add what's something you didn't know before?
I was gonna say, Sharice, I love what you just said about cultivating genius. One is I never thought I could enjoy being around other people's children this much. Like I never thought that I would love, I came from higher ed and now I teach high school, and I love living at a boarding school. Like these kids, they're so much fun, and I like seeing them like after their school day is over, because we also like coach the sports and I advise like the cooking club. Like, so I get to do all these things and be with them in all these different realms. Like when they need a safety pin and they knock on my door, Dr. Marshall, you have a safety pin. Like, fine, right? So I get to do a whole lot of stuff. But I think that one thing I didn't know, and this is what made me think when you talked about it, was really knowing the history of Black teachers. I just got this book, Fugitive Pedagogy, that I just sit down and read about Carter G. Woodson. Like, I never knew. So in my last school, when I was at university, I was the only Black woman in my department. And now that I'm here, I'm the only Black woman. And I always felt like alone, and like, oh my God, it's like horrible and stuff. And to be clear, it is, right? We need more. But I think learning about like the midnight schools and freedom schools, and just learning about the lengths to which Black people wanted to learn, right? And just reading things like Booker T. Washington, when he talks about how the whole race is going to school, and it's mind-boggling. But to also see the lengths at which Black teachers went, right, to learn and to want to do their jobs, right? And I look at all the attacks that were tossed at them, and the ways people talked about young Black women teachers back in the 19th century, and people like Ida B. Wells, like they were teachers. And it's such to talk about humbling. It's so humbling to me to be like in this number, right, of Black educators, especially being an English teacher, what you talked about with literacy and the fights for literacy. And I sit sometimes and I just think, because my father couldn't read. He was born in Georgia in the 1930s, and he did not go to a lot of school. And when I think about what it must have been like for people trying to go to school and trying to be teachers, it's amazing to me. So I'm shocked at how enriching and how much that knowledge strengthens me. And it's something that I wish could be a part of every school, right? That everybody knows about the history of Black educators and what they've done in schools.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good podcast idea. That's definitely it's definitely a great point. It's so important to know about your history. I mean, even
and students too, like what Black students have done, right? So when you think about activism, and it's students holding walkouts, it's students protesting, in the school, students leaving school. It's just, the school has meant so much, or educating has meant so much, both inside a schoolroom and outside of a schoolroom. And that's the thing I would love to see brought back. So when I talk about family engagement, it's like, how do I use that homegrown knowledge, that homegrown expertise that those kids already have, their families, their communities already have, and build with that. Not like say, put that to the side. I'm going to fill you with, this other stuff.
And also creating the space for that to exist, right? Like some parents feel lost, right? And they don't, like, what do you do? How do you handle this, that, and a third, right? My parents are immigrants. They came to this country. They didn't know anything, right? They sent my sister off to school. She just had to figure it out, right? And then my brother came along and I came along. We just had to figure it out, right? They didn't have a network of people that they always trusted, right, until we got older, and then they started to build that network. But I have a lot of parents, of my students who are like, well, what do I do? How do I navigate this? How do I navigate that? Right. So cultivating that space for parents and students to be able to have those conversations and say, oh, well, this is available in the community, or that is available in the community, right? This is what I know about this thing, and sharing those things is so important, because access, right? That's the key word. Like, access matters, and not having access is a downfall of this system.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree. Definitely creating that space in the classroom. Creating these spaces where we can share ideas with students and families. I know I'm always trying to think of ways, how can I, get information to families, and definitely being willing to share what you know. And I agree. Anybody want to add to that? Add to accessibility and the sharing of information, right? Because that's what this is. We're here to share information, have a nice fun conversation, but also share information and ways that we can advocate for ourselves. I know parents, I've had to tell parents like, hey, like, or if I wanted to tell parents but didn't for whatever reason, it was like, hey, you have a right to demand certain things from your school. You have a right to advocate for your child. Yes, sometimes, yes, the teachers are the experts in the classroom, but you also know your child and work with them. It's not, it's not either or. It's you both come together to do what's best for the student. But definitely any parents on here, don't be afraid. I as a teacher, I would love you to come to me and say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. Hey, even if it has nothing to do with the schoolwork, like, hey, we don't have food at home. I'd rather know and figure out a way to help you than your child coming in cranky and I'm trying to figure it out, and and they're not telling, the kid's not telling me anything.
And I think being on both sides of that is also very humbling for me, right? I don't have any children of my own, but we recently adopted my niece. And I think for me, that was like, I was like, wow, this is a whole nother side of it that I didn't know, right? Like, advocating for my niece. Like, she needs this, she needs that, she needs this, she needs that. So because I was thrusted into this new role as like pseudo mom of this child, I'm even more cautious of the ways in which I communicate with students and parents, because I'm like, wow, now I'm advocating for a child, and I know how that must feel for you advocating for your child or for yourself. And so being even more vulnerable with that has helped me with the way I talk to parents and students.
I mean, I agree with you a lot, Kimberly. I mean, I work in the education world, but I'm a parent of 4. And before I started working in the education world, I had to find a school for my oldest. And it wasn't the great experience. I live in the South Bronx. There weren't that many great options. So it was a struggle, because, when it came time for me to look for my daughter to go into school, I also learned about the education system and how great it wasn't, right? I was like, yeah, I grew up, I went to college, I did good, but I didn't do great. I realized that I had to take remedial classes going into college, right? So I was like, what happened from K to 12, right? Like, why wasn't I prepared enough to be able to go into college and be able to be competitive and do what I have to do, instead of wasting money and taking remedial classes, right? So I learned about all of that, and I'm like, wait a minute, I don't want that for my kids. I would like to find a school where they could be able to thrive, be themselves, and be able to compete against with other folks you know, in the community, in the world. So that prompted me to look more into education. And one thing that I started doing that I became very passionate about was going into Head Starts and educating families, creating workshops where it's like, this is your right as a parent, right? Like, I have really great relationships with all of my kids' schools. I'm that one parent that I am respectful of teacher's time, but if I have to come to you and ask you, what is X, Y, and Z? What is this? What is that? I am that parent. So one thing I loved doing was being able to empower parents and give them those skills that they need to be able to go into their school building, right? One thing I love to do was also telling families, we don't have the pleasure in New York City to be able to be in a new school, in a good school. So what happens when your student goes into a okay school in the neighborhood, right? That maybe the percentages are not that great. Like, how can you still stay involved as a parent? And I think that is really, like, really crucial as a parent, being able to navigate the system. And it's tough because it's like you want a lot of things for your kids, and unfortunately, you know, we're in the system where I feel like it doesn't have the best intentions for our scholars. I mean, I love the educators. I feel like they're working great, but I just feel like the system that we have here in New York City, I would definitely love to continue to advocate so that more scholars can have the opportunity to be able to just read and write on their grade level.
Yeah, thank you for that, Yvonne. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that is a good point, right? If you can't, you know, for some reason you can't go to the best school in your neighborhood, okay, what can you do where you're at? And yeah. And I know, Charles, I wanted to ask you a question. How would, like, is there anything, like, what is something like you would want to change about education or anything? Like, what are you hoping for with as far as when you do start, you're going to college next year, you're going to A&T right next year, right? Yeah. Great. Yeah, so like what is congratulations on that. Yeah, my cousin's in the chat. She also went to North Carolina A&T. So yeah, because she's yeah. So anything that what would you like to say about, like, anything you would change from your high school experience, elementary, middle school, or anything you're looking forward to in college?
So what I would change, there's a few things that I don't want to get like too far into it, but I'd say the biggest thing for me during that journey was, Yvonne, I don't know if you saw, but while you were talking about you were the parent that would go up to the school, I looked at my mom, because that's been her. My teachers have always known her on a first name basis, and she was there early and often if anything was ever needed. And I think that was so big because there is a large disconnect a lot of times between, you know, home and then the classroom. It's two different things. And I feel like that's one of the biggest problems, because I believe, like, it was either Miss Marshall, Miss Cummins said, if we could take what we learned at home and apply it in school, you know, and it could be both and instead of either or, you know, it would be a lot easier to learn things and apply it because you're relating it to stuff you already know, you know, instead of I go home to my Black family and, you know, we do Black people stuff because we're Black. And then I have to go to school and deal with the Eurocentric model of education that has excluded anything that is not Eurocentric all day. And it's just so hard, you know, to connect the two worlds unless you just are that type of person that can do both and, you know, code switching, really know when to turn it on and know when to turn it off. And it's that I feel like that's one of the biggest problems, because there is a large disconnect. So I would say that, and wraparound services. I think that's really big because, you know, teachers, a lot of teachers, most teachers do a great job, but it's like, you know, you go home and then it's done, or, you know, the achievement, you know, or the level of knowledge gained for around the school year for, you know, all classes of income, social welfare, you know, is all about the same regardless. But it's the summer months where the lower income kids and the gap starts growing, and it just continues as they get older. But the achievement during the school year is about the same. And so I'd say wraparound services is big, because if you can't afford to send your kid to that math summer camp, you know, or the super readers, or just any of those extracurricular activities that other people have access to, and they're just losing, you know, all summer, and then they go back after doing nothing for 3 months, and they have to be, you know, up on top with all these kids that have been reading all these books and, you know, doing all these different programs and things to help get them ahead. and you're just trying to stay afloat. And I feel like that's one of the biggest things. So I would definitely try to like introduce more wraparound services and get those services to the community, because there are things there, but it's like, okay, who actually has access to these things, or who even knows they exist? So definitely, I would definitely move away from the generalist model of education that was made to produce workers instead of thinkers, and then also introduce and popularize wraparound supports for children and families.
Yes, wow. Thank you so much, Charles. Yeah, I'll definitely, those are definitely great points to keep in mind, wraparound services. And that's similar to community schools, right? Where it's a school where the community can get, whatever they need, whether it's dental services or, different things. And yeah, that's a good point. Some people say the summer slide isn't real, but yeah, it's definitely gaps. I've definitely, being back in the classroom after COVID, the gaps that I see are just amazing. It astonishes me sometimes. But I do work mostly with students with special needs. But still, I think there are gaps even with general students in general ed. So we do have like 15 minutes left, so probably have time for like one or two more questions. So we can start looking ahead so with this question, what important new trend will we be talking about at next year's conference?
I think if it's in terms of education,
right?
I think a big thing is going to be kind of what has been put in place during the pandemic that was good, that we'd like to keep going, right? So I know for us, we used to have school from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then we stopped that. Then we had one time where we had like 8 p.m. because we have students in Asia. So we have to deal with time zones here. But now our schedule is from like 8 to 3:30, right? And so it's like, well, is that better for our students, right? When we had in our dorms, we have free laundry now. Before, kids had to pay, but then all the laundry became free because they needed to wash their masks, right? So are things like that, bringing food trucks to campus, having like dorm snack, because we couldn't leave because we need all our kids to stay here. So bringing in things to entertain them, bringing in barbers and hairstylists, right? Because they can't go, they have to stay in. So I wonder to what extent we'll keep those things, but also as the world starts to open up to whatever this new normal is, to what extent will those go away and those old divisions come back? So I think that's going to be really key. And also I think thinking about the workload for teachers and teachers' emotional needs and coming out of this pandemic, and hopefully the dual role of teachers who are also caretakers and kind of what that role has been like. So I think that's what's gonna, I hope, will be the next thing we think about. Like, what does the new normal, if there is a new normal for education?
Okay, teachers and caretakers.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I think, again, like I said, I teach in the alternative high school, right? My students are traditionally overaged and undercredited, and a lot of them have, because of the pandemic, right? Already they had responsibilities, adult responsibilities, but because of the pandemic, they had even more adult responsibilities, right? So how are we ensuring that they can still work, right? That they can still get their high school diploma before the system decides that they are no longer, deemed good enough to still get a high school diploma, right? And so, and I know you mentioned, Sharice, about community schools, right? My school is a community school. We have that dental stuff, the vision stuff, right? How are we ensuring that these things that worked during the pandemic are going to continue so that our students are not dropping out and that their families do have what they need? And then also, as Courtney was saying, making sure that teachers' self-care is also met, right? How are you ensuring that teachers have what they need to teach this in this new normal, right? Because last March, we just were thrown into it. Just figure it out, right? So how are you making sure that they can have those resources to teach to the best of their ability, and teaching the whole child and the whole family, right? Not just what the student needs to learn for this Regents exam or advanced placement exam or whatever, but so that they can transition into life after high school or whatever grade level they're in with you.
Okay, thank you, Kimberly. So the last part you were saying that you want students to be able to practice self-care, take care of themselves. I know you mentioned you want them to work, be able to.
I was more so speaking of teachers, but students. I think that the whole child is important, but the whole teacher is important too, right? Like, you know, I know we care about the students, but we can't do the best that we can if we are not taken care of, right? Like, how am I able to do all of this on top of everything that's going on in the world, right? And making sure that I can do that for myself and then provide the resources for students and families to be able to do the same thing.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I was reading the article the other day about like students being able to, high school students being able to work because of remote, they'll be able to work more easierly. Is that a word? So it's easier for them to work. So yeah, that's a great point. That'd definitely be nice to keep up. Oh, okay. Anybody else had anything that they wanted to add to it? Okay. Yes. Oh, do you have a question in the chat, or is it okay? Okay. My cousin asked a question. How much autonomy does a teacher have in a classroom as far as introducing political topics, current events, sharing personal experiences? To what degree is this allowed?
I think that depends on the community. I can only speak for myself and the school community that I'm in. I encourage myself to do it as a history teacher. I will do it. I've done it before. I do it now, and I'm going to forever do it. I do have that autonomy, and it is encouraged. Again, like I was sharing earlier before we even started, there are some teachers who may be fearful of that, right? But then it's also, what ability does a teacher have in doing that, right? So I was reading something recently about, you know, the well-intended white liberal, right, who comes into schools to teach Black and brown students, and they have this well intent, but what happens, what plays out in their speech, in their body language, in what they say, and how what they present does not always translate. And so I think before you can even give a teacher the autonomy, I guess, to teach whatever, are they prepared to have those conversations with those students, right? And I have to ask myself that, right? Just because I am Black and I am a woman and I grew up in Brooklyn and I have immigrant parents, sometimes I have to recognize my own privilege and how that plays out into the conversations that I have with students and what I teach them. And so I think autonomy does depend on school and community and systems. But are you even prepared to do that? I think is the first question, because some of us are not prepared to do those things. We don't acknowledge our own implicit biases and things that play out that hurt students. So I think it's a even deeper question than just the autonomy.
Yes. Thank you, Kamaria, for that question, and thank you, Kimberly. Yeah, I was just taking notes. Just so many things I could add on to that. Just I think I know a few well-intentioned liberals that I had to work with, but yeah, and definitely acknowledging self-bias and definitely checking in with yourself, checking your privilege. because I know for the DOE, I just started the DOE this year, and like one of the teachers there was telling me that, you know, if you can defend, if you can back up why you're, because sometimes I get nervous. I'm like, am I going to get fired if I talk about this? But I know, but just in general, just like for stuff that isn't too controversial, I know she was saying that as long as you can back up what you're saying, like you can defend why you're teaching this, then you should be okay. Like you can say, hey, you know, these are the reasons why the students need to learn this. You should be okay. Those combos. So we only have a few minutes left. Anything you'd like to add about that? About like how do you teach? How do you like, you know, like, as you know, I know we're talking about advocating, and how do you, you know, test your bravery and courage to, you know, teach kids what, you know, they need to learn. Does anybody want to speak on that? Just in general, like, because I think no matter what profession you are, as a Black person, sometimes you, or, you know, Latinx person, you don't want to be silent. You want to feel seen. You want to feel heard. You want the people around you to feel seen and heard. So anybody want to speak on that? Any last words about advocacy or anything like that?
Well, I think for me as an English teacher who studied Black literature, like I think it's gorgeous literature. It's vital to being a you know, an educated person, I guess. It's to me, teaching Black literature is in some ways can be seen as political, but to me it's just literature. Like Black people, they're the center, right? They're not on the margins for me. And I find in talking about or thinking about this question of political topics and personal experience is about like what's been seen as center and what's seen as marginal. And when I, as somebody who studies what is seen as marginal, but I make it the center, then to me, I don't have those same types of anxieties that other teachers in my school have about teaching that topic or talking that I don't have to justify it. I don't have to do a whole lot of explaining. I'm just like, this is why wouldn't we learn about the Harlem Renaissance? Like, what's political about that? Or, you know, if I'm trying to get my students to, you know, figure out what their own questions are, right? I want them to be able to question things themselves. And there's things that I can model for them. And if I want to expose them to things, to me, that is part of what education is supposed to, that's what they told me, right? So I always say, y'all told us it's about exposure and new, you know, perspective and stuff. But now here's a new perspective for what's really the truth, like that Oprah. So tell me what's really the truth, right? And so that's where it comes back to me. And I tell my students, like I said, I teach 10th grader, and I'm like, I want everybody to be an English major. I want all of y'all to go off and be English teachers. Because, you know, I just believe in it. I believe in it that much. And a lot of times I don't get into arguments with a lot of my coworkers anyway, because I'm not arguing with critical race theory. I'm not arguing with somebody who don't know what it means, right? So if somebody want to come and talk about Black literature, should we be doing this, that, go do the reading, do the work, then come back and we'll discuss it. But I don't get pulled and derailed by people saying something is too political. Go tell that to somebody else. Not me. I've been too educated, too Black for too long.
That's good. Yeah, that's true. I never heard that. I've been too Black for too long. Thank you. Thank you so much to all the panelists. I guess we can, on that note, we can start wrapping up. Thank you so much for being on the panel. It was such a pleasure. Just want to remind everybody, yes, you can continue this conversation on social media with the hashtag Soybeanie or Soybeanie 2021, and